Good evening. I am so happy to be here, particularly as an alum of Harvard Seminary, because I just gained so much from the time that I was here, which I will share a little bit with you about that. And you just never know where life is going to take you. So I am just delighted that you all have come out this evening for such an important topic. So I hope that after I am done with our presentation that we will have a lot of conversations around this issue of wounded by religion. May I ask by a show of hands, how many people in here have ever experienced some wounds of religion or know someone else who's experienced some wounds of religion? Okay, when we know someone else, we'll raise our hand with that. Wow, that's like most of the room. So you are in the right place this evening, and I will try as much as possible to give you as much information I can in the short time that we have together, and then after we can talk about some ways to further this conversation. 14 years ago, I would not have imagined that I would be in this place talking with you tonight about the wounds of religion. In fact, I didn't even imagine myself becoming a pastor. Those of you who know me know that I ran from my calling for such a long time. But I couldn't run from my calling after hearing this very powerful sermon. And it was given by the Reverend Robina Winbush, who is a prominent pastor within my denomination, the Presbyterian denomination. And so I was sitting in a room one day at a women's retreat, and she gave this sermon, and it was called, "Can You Hear Me Now?" And honestly, it was like God wrote that sermon just for me, because everything she said in that sermon was so related to my life. She told how she ran from becoming a minister for such a long time that, she was going to become a minister when she was about 50 years old, and she wanted to be a child clinical psychologist, all of that. And I worked with adolescents as a licensed psychologist, and I had just said to God, yes, one day, I'll answer the call. But that was the day. And so I was so shaken by this experience that I went to her after, and I said, I'd like to talk with you, Robina. Now, ironically, I had already envisioned having a conversation with her about one of the things that was going on in our denomination at the time. And even though I didn't identify it as a wound of religion, I knew it was something that I needed to talk with her about. But in that moment, I wanted to talk with her about this calling. I was so shaken, and I said to her, I want to speak with you, but we can do it much, much later, because I was still running even in that moment. I didn't want to deal with this issue of being called by God to become a pastor. I mean, really, those of you who are pastors in here, you can admit it. This is hard work. And so sometimes we do run from it. So I said to her, I'll come much later and talk to you. I don't know what she saw on my face. I believe she probably saw terror on my face. And so she said, no, come now. So I went with her to her suite, and I just began to sob. And I said, I don't know, Robina. I don't know. And she very gently said, you know, Terrlyn, you know. And so I said, I believe that God is calling me to become a pastor. And she said, I'm not surprised. And I said, but why? I'm a psychologist. I'm already serving God. Trust me, I am serving God as a psychologist. I don't need to become an ordained pastor. And she said, Terrlyn, it's not that you aren't serving God right now as a psychologist, but what can you do as an ordained minister that you cannot do as a psychologist? Those were very wise words. And so after talking with Robina and talking with two other pastors who promptly said the exact same thing that she said, is, Terrlyn, I'm not surprised. I mean, it looked like I was the only one who wasn't surprised out of the four of us that God was calling me to do this. I enrolled at Harvard Seminary in their cooperative program with Yale Divinity School. And I I was still proclaiming, I am not going to become a pastor of a church. I want to do women's ministry. I want to lead workshops. I want to help women to heal and to be empowered to manifest their greatness. But I had one of the greatest experiences here. And those of you who are students here, or those of you who are alumni, you know that this is a great place to be. Because here I was able to engage with dynamic professors and students, and I was supported in thinking outside of the box, something that I've always done anyway. And all those millions and millions of questions that I had always asked about the Bible since I was a child, sometimes annoying other people, Hartford Seminary was the place that I could ask those questions. And so I appreciated that. I appreciated engaging with Muslim students who shared their faith while seeking to explore Christian faith. And here I gained a deeper understanding of other faith traditions, while at the same time understanding why I believed what I believe. Because when other people start to ask you why you believe certain things, you better know why you believe those things. Not just because the church tells you so, but you need to know for yourself, why do you believe the doctrine that you believe? So try explaining it to someone from another faith tradition, and it helps you to deepen your own relationship. And when I enrolled at Yale Divinity School, I was equally challenged to delve deeper into my belief system. Notably during that time, as it's been for years, there was a hot button conversation that was going on with my denomination, and it was around our LGBTQ community. And I found myself frustrated about my denomination's stance on certain issues. And I perceived them to be crawling at a snail's pace towards change. And I'm not sure what I said to my polity professor, but she said, "Terrlyn, you can't change a system unless you're in a system." Okay. But I'm still not pastoring a church. I'm going to do women's ministry. So somewhere along the line between Hartford Seminary and Yale Divinity School, I got the grand idea to write a book on meditations. I don't know what I was thinking. I had 2 small children. I had a husband. I had a private practice, and I was a student. How could I write a book? But eventually, a few years after Divinity School and after finally pastoring a church, I wrote Sacred Intelligence, the essence of sacred, selfish, and shared relationships. The foundation of that book is based on Luke 10:27. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength, with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. Love your neighbor as yourself. But in my work as a psychologist, I've worked with so many people who don't love themselves. So how could they possibly love their neighbor as thyself? So I believe that we all have within us the capacity to love ourselves and to love our neighbors. But that capacity comes from our sacred source, whatever that is for you. But I believe that we have sacred intelligence. And what sacred intelligence is that divine part of you that reminds you that you are divinely created and loved unconditionally. And when you understand that you are divinely created and loved unconditionally, you will be careful about what you do to yourself. You will be careful about what you do to other people, and you will be careful about what you allow other people to do to you. So we want to use our sacred intelligence in a way that manifests our greatness and the greatness of others. But we've got to learn how to tap into that sacred intelligence. And so when we are able to tap into it, which is what I talk about in my book, we learn how to develop healthier relationships with the sacred. We learn how to develop healthier relationships with ourselves, which I call selfish, and I know some people have an issue with that, but I say it intentionally and to be provocative because we need to be in tune with what's going on with us. And we learn how to develop healthier relationships with other people. And in the book, I share tools and strategies on ways to tap into our sacred intelligence and to deepen all of these relationships. But I invite the reader to reflect, examine, and clear out thoughts, patterns, and behaviors that prohibit us from manifesting our greatness and manifesting the greatness in others. But there's something that I discovered, or it was more like a revelation. Now, remember that I said I was already serving God as a psychologist, and remember that I really didn't want to become a pastor. Now, I want to pause for a minute to tell you why I didn't want to become a pastor. I didn't want to become a pastor because I had grown up in church all my life, and I love God, and I love growing up in church. My father was an elder. I believe almost every person in my family was probably an elder. I skipped being an elder and went straight to being a pastor. Glory to God. I didn't intend on that, but I had been to about 3 or 4 different churches in my lifetime, and for extended periods of time, I wasn't church hopping. And I want to let you in on a little secret. This is why I didn't want to become a pastor. Church folks are crazy. And I mean that in the most loving way. But people bring all of who they are, the good, bad, and the ugly, into church, and they deal with it right there, but they don't think they need help. When you come to me as a psychologist, you're coming to me because you're admitting that there's a problem. When people come to church, they believe that they've been saved and sanctified and healed, and they don't have any other work to do. So, it comes full circle for me. I began to understand why I was called to this service, to heal the wounds of religion. When I returned to my private practice, because I couldn't do that when I went to Yale Divinity School, I had to let that go for a bit. But I noticed that more and more people began to come to me with wounds of religion. Not so much before I went to school, but after. It was like this light was turned on and they knew that they could come to me at that point. And they didn't just come to me with subtle stories. They came to me with gut-wrenching stories of wounds of religion. Stories that made me cringe as a psychologist, but stories that sickened me as a woman who was called by God to minister to other folks. And most assuredly, these people did not experience the love of God with those wounds. And I realized even more that while I talked about developing a deeper relationship in my book, some people couldn't even get to that point of developing a relationship with the sacred because they had been too wounded by religious folks or religious doctrine. So before they could even go to develop a relationship that would help them to manifest their greatness, they needed to deal with the wounds of religion. Some folks had even distanced themselves from the sacred, and other people were just so angry at the sacred for something that humankind did that they weren't ready to go deeper. There were people who were steeped in church tradition who wanted to hold on to their belief in the sacred, but they were just too angry And so before we could do any therapy to deal with their lives, we had to deal with the trauma that they experienced in church. So they needed to deal with the scabs and the gaping holes that were present. And some of these individuals, as I said, left their faith community altogether. But interestingly, others remained in church, but they still didn't feel loved or connected to the sacred. They felt judged by their community. And so it's my desire and my calling to help heal these wounds. And so I offer online programs, workshops, retreats, private work with clients so that we can address these issues. Because I want everyone to know that they are divinely created and loved unconditionally. And no one can ever take that from them. When you know that in the depths of your soul, that you are divinely created and loved unconditionally, it helps you to make decisions that are going to manifest your greatness. And when you're surrounded by people who want to continue to wound you with their interpretations, with their understanding of religion and of God, you can say, no, that's not my understanding. So what are some of these wounds? I'm sure you know them because a lot of hands went up. And I don't even have time to list all of the wounds that I know of, because even when I meet people socially and I say that I work with people who've been wounded by religion, they'll say, oh, do I have a story for you? So we all can recognize those severe cases of wounding. Like when we read about 2 young boys who were beaten so badly by their church, including their parents. They were beaten so badly that they looked like they had suffered gunshot wounds and they eventually died. They were beaten because they wanted to leave their congregation. We all can recognize those wounds. We can recognize sexual abuse, and we can recognize when pastors get arrested for holding a sex trafficking scheme within their church. We can recognize those blatant and obvious wounds, but sometimes we can't recognize the subtle wounds. And those are the dangerous wounds. We unintentionally and sometimes intentionally hurt other people by the conversations that we have about them. We hurt other people when some members don't feel supported within their congregation. They don't feel heard. We hurt other people when we engage in reaction over reflection. And what I mean by that is when we have an emotional response to confrontation and feedback that our church members are giving us. And rather than us stopping to consider their point of view, we get angry and upset, especially if we are leaders and we try to lower the boom on them. That's a wound of religion. Sometimes a wound of religion is when we put rules over relationships. I was having a conversation with my sister the other day about this because in one of my programs that I have, I talk about this situation that happened to me. I was visiting a church one day, and it was not a part of my denomination, so it was Communion Sunday. I walked down to the altar. I kneeled down at the altar, which is not my tradition at all, put my hand out for the wafer, and the pastor went to give me the wafer, and then he just passed me and didn't give it to me. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about, right? So I look around and I'm like, is there something wrong? I had not cupped my hand. So I cupped my hand, and then he came back and gave me a wafer. Now, I have to tell you, I was pretty ticked off. And I should not have taken communion that day. But I took it. And all the way back to my seat, I was angry. I mean, I was hot. In fact, my sister was hot when I told her about it the other day. And this happened years ago. And I think I've worked through the forgiveness part. And so the person I had gone to church with, I shared with him what had happened and how angry I was. And he said, just calm down. And I said, no. What if this was the first time I was coming to this church? What if this the first time I've come to church, period? I wouldn't come back to church anymore. Rules over relationship. And as a Christian, I can tell you it has nothing to do with the God I serve. Wounding of religion. And then there are those cases where there's money as a measure of worth. You know, when you go to church and you have to put a certain amount of money into the offering plate, and people don't feel comfortable if they don't put that amount of money in the offering plate. Or when people stand up in church and say, I'm going to start the offering at $20, $100, and I'm hoping everybody can follow suit. I know some of you all know exactly what I'm talking about. I might have $1 in my pocket. Then what? Or what about favor over confrontation? You know, when you have that church member who's running everything in the church but abusing everybody at the same time, and you don't want to deal with the issue that person needs confronting in order to stop abusing, to stop being mean, to stop being nasty. These are the stories that I hear. What about people during those cases where the pastor calls them out from the pulpit? Or people who are made to feel guilty if they don't do enough work in the church. Those are the subtle wounds that are not so subtle to the people who are being wounded. But here's the thing, the devastating effects of this type of treatment and really distorted religious beliefs, because really it's the distorted religious beliefs that people are imposing on other folks that wound them. And it doesn't just end with that person. Ultimately, wounding is when we take these beliefs, our distorted thinking, to justify killing and oppressing others, particularly groups of people who think and look differently than we do. When we use the Bible to defend separating immigrant families, when we blame the actions of a few radicals on an entire religion, we fail to see the value in other beliefs and other people. And we began to treat them as something less than human, and in ways that are actually counter to our own religious convictions. And so we wound ourselves by carrying around anger and hostility for certain groups, and we miss out on opportunities to learn about other groups. Think about the experience that Muslims and Christians and Jews experience here at Harvard Seminary and either other faith traditions. If we were not in a place where we were willing to listen and learn, how devastating would that be? And so I say that we must strive to be more than tolerant, but we must be sincere and accepting of people with different beliefs, or at least exploring these beliefs with an open mind. So what are some of the impacts of religious wounding? There's psychological impacts of religious wounding. If you've listened to my TED Talk, you probably heard me say in there that I worked with a gentleman for years who was severely depressed. And he had tried every form of medication that he could. He'd even tried electroconvulsive therapy. And the only thing that he had not tried was coming out of the closet. And it was painful even as a psychologist to watch him suffer. The wounds of religion are deep. and the impact is great. People suffer emotionally. They suffer physically. They suffer financially and spiritually, of course, and oftentimes people develop these poor relationships or have stunted growth and believe that they shouldn't go any farther in life and they should be happy where they are. People engage in self-sabotaging behavior, and sadly, people repeat the cycles of abuse. And nothing is more prevalent than that when we see women who become leaders of churches, who continue cycles of abuse that they've had from the patriarchy. Wounds of religion are deep. Sometimes we hide behind religion. Sometimes we're hypercritical and we're judgmental because we have something to hide. How many times have you heard pastors speak out against homosexuality? And all the while, they are homosexual. And it's not about the being homosexual, it's about you speaking out and being judgmental and critical, but you're hiding because you're wounded. It's time that we stop the wounds of religion. And so I want you to know that healing is possible, because I know that many of you in here have dealt with some wounds of religion. You struggle within your own churches and denominations to find your voice and to speak out, but you have to deal with the pain and believe that healing is possible. Give yourself permission to feel what you need to feel without guilt. And wrestle with God, wrestle with the sacred, wrestle with your power source to try to understand where you are in this space and time. I know the God I serve is big enough to handle it. Amen. But in order to heal from the wounds of religion, it's also important to set boundaries and parameters for how folks treat you. Because folks treat us in the way that we allow them to treat us. And then I invite you also to practice strong communication. Be quick to listen, actively listening, and listen to what's not being said, particularly if you are a leader helping someone to get through their wounds of religion. Listen to what's not being said. It is so critical. If you are here tonight and you are clergy, there's clergy in the room, people who are clergy. It is so important for you to deal with your own wounds, because hurt folks hurt other folks. And so unless as a clergy you deal with the stuff that's going on with you and the wounds that you've experienced, you'll continue the cycle. So take some time to confront your wounds and acknowledge your past and your current hurts. And don't take it personally when someone comes to you to talk about their issues and when somebody reacts in a negative way to you, even if it reminds you of a wound that you experience. Because you know people bring their stuff to church. Church is a hospital for sick people, is it not? And so they bring their stuff to church. So they're not responding to you. They're responding based on something that's happened to them. So deal with it. But it's also important as clergy to seek objective counsel. And so whether you're clergy or a parishioner and you've been hurt, it's important for you to seek guidance. It's important. And that guidance may not be from someone who's in your church. In fact, I would say it should be someone who's not in your church. And then there's a need to heal faith communities as a whole. Not just the clergy, not just the parishioner, but we really need to take a look at our church as a whole. So we need to take a moment to look, listen, and feel. Look out into your congregation on Sunday mornings. We need to acknowledge the past hurts that happen in our congregations. One of the things that I am very fortunate enough to do is to serve as interim pastor, because I get to go in, deal with the stuff, and get up out of there, right? No offense to the people here who I'm currently pastoring, but I get to deal with the hurts and the pains, and it is not an easy job, because my job is to go in and to sweep it up, to remove it from under the carpet. Because what happens is when we have a hurt in the church, when the whole church has been hurt, we tend to sweep it under the rug, and all we do is trip over it all the time. And so the next pastor comes in and they got to deal with that stuff. We need to deal with the wounds within our institutions. The other thing we need to do is we need to examine who's missing from our congregations. Our churches are getting smaller and smaller and smaller, but we want to sing the same hymns every Sunday. We want to force people to dress a certain way when they come to church. We do not want to open the doors for the millennials at all, and guess what? They're going to church elsewhere. So the church is going to die with the members of the church who are still in there, the 5, 10, 15 members who are still in church, right? And I invite you for your faith institution to explore whether your mission statement and vision for your faith community is really lived out in the way that your church is represented. Look at your activities. Explore what's going on in your church. And then I also invite you as a church community to really seek objective counsel. It is so important, because you cannot change a system with the very mindset that created it. Isn't that what Albert Einstein said? Right? So unless you get someone to come in and do the work that needs to be done, you can't heal the wounds of religion. It is possible to be healed. Ultimate healing comes from centering ourselves, though, in the sacred, in God, in our power source, whoever that is for us. But on the way to centering ourselves, I go back to seeking that objective counsel. Get someone you trust. And when you've been wounded by religion, it's often hard to trust anyone. That's why it's easier for people to come to me, because they come for the psychological stuff that's going on, and they're delighted when they find out that I'm a pastor and I can give them a different perspective, because that's my job to do that. And so I'm grateful that even though I fought becoming a pastor and did not want to pastor a church, I am grateful to be in the position to say to folks who come to me, I understand religion. I understand religious doctrine, and I really understand church folk. And being an ordained pastor helps me to do that. So I'm grateful for that calling, and I'm grateful to be a trusted guide that helps many people to heal the wounds of religion. But I want to also invite you that as you are healing and allowing the sacred to heal you, stay focused on your healing. Don't look at what everybody else is doing to get healed. Their path and their journey may not be your journey. Stay focused and centered on what the sacred is guiding you to do. And then throughout the process, show gratitude for the healing that you are experiencing, even if it's tiny. Tiny steps are important. And gratitude makes room for more healing, does it not? And it opens our eyes in a different way. And so it's possible to be healed by the sacred. We must center ourselves in the sacred. And we must find our sacred intelligence that is within us. And we must learn to tap into it. For when we do, we know that we are divinely created and loved unconditionally. And we don't have to put up with the wounds of religion anymore. Thank you.
So now we're going to do a Q&A, and then after that portion, we're going to give the microphone back to Dr. Avery. She's going to have some final comments. So anyone who has a comment, question? Don't be shy. All right.
Don't be shy.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I apologies for walking in late. It was just, what can you say, beyond my control. But I just wanted to thank you for being available and for sharing. And I just wanted to say that just the last phrase in itself made it all worth the while for everything I had to go through to get here tonight to hear you. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. And it's recorded, so you can always go back and listen to it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
I know you all have questions, comments.
Hi, thank you so much for presenting your thoughts about the sacred and wounding in as a corporate bodies and as individuals in churches. And I guess my question has to do with situations that occur in our church that has wounded the entire church. We lost half of our population, and the people that have been sent from the higher organization to us don't want to deal with what that was then and this is now. And it's hard for us, just the congregation, to bring up this issue, though, you know, my husband has nightmares about attending church on Saturday night. Nightmares. And you know, lots of people dragging in there just to keep it open because it's an institution that's mostly black, and we are trying to keep that institution alive should someone want to walk in the door. But there seems like a divide between the ministerial part and the congregational part, where it doesn't seem as though someone wants to, you know, like they heal the wounds of my people too easily, saying peace, peace, when there is no peace. So if you have any words of, I don't know, anything.
I'm glad you took that deep breath.
What magic wand?
So there is no magic wand, and the answer to that is not an easy answer. Because several things went through my mind as you were talking. First, why would anybody want to come to that church? You know, people hold on to churches because of their stuff, you know, their tradition. But if we keep in mind, what was the scripture that I read when we first began? You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And so I wonder, in churches like that, are we demonstrating the love of God? And so at that point, are we serving that church, or are we serving God? That would be my first question that I would ask. And I would say that individually, people do have to decide, are you going to a church that's feeding your soul? Because first and foremost, the church needs to feed your soul. It shouldn't be about going there and there's the fighting that happens. You know, I say to people, you have a choice in anything that you do. It's just like in a relationship. If two people are in a relationship and you're asking and you're begging one person to change or to let's go and do what we need to do to heal, and one person wants to and the other person doesn't want to, that person who doesn't want to is making a choice. Yep. And so the person who wants to has to make a choice. Yeah. And sometimes it means leaving that place. The other thing, which is very hard to do, I understand that. But the other thing is, in order for that church to heal, it's virtually impossible for it to heal if it doesn't come from leadership down. And so it's important for your leadership to invite someone to come in and I know they don't want to because people are often threatened by this. And that's when you have to make your decisions, right? And so the way that church heals is to have an independent person to come in and to be able to hear all the voices in the church and to be able to then give them feedback around that. But they have to want to do that in order for it to happen.
You've already answered my question. There's two words. You said we have a choice or to leave. So I would like to ask, I had a conversation with a friend of mine. Actually, he's a prayer partner of mine. And he looked at me. He goes, why aren't you? No, he says, why are you still there? He says, and he said it so softly. He says, I just don't understand. Why are you still there? I have been wounded. I still am going through a church hurt. I'm still there, not because grandma, grandpa, whatever. I don't know why I don't know why. And I think I need to pray and ask God to lead me.
And you need to listen.
I'm actually petrified.
so
I'm
listen
actually
to it.
petrified to leave. I'm petrified.
We could have a conversation probably after this, because that is way too long to answer it in 5 minutes, because I'd want to know why you're petrified to leave, and I'd want to know what the church represents for you. Because when you stay in a church that's wounding you, it literally chips away at your very essence and your soul, and you cannot be the best you that you can be. Now, some folks choose to stay in their congregations. I remember I took a course here, my very first semester here with Scott Thuman, and it was around LGBT issues, and we had to read this book, and there were people who were talking about staying in their particular traditions, because I would just say, well, why don't you just leave the tradition since they won't accept you? And they said, I can't take away being X, Y, and Z any more than I can take away being gay, right? So for them, they wanted to stay with a tradition that they knew and loved.
I don't think it has anything to do with tradition. We're on our fourth.
Okay.
We're on our fourth pastor, so that's a big. But we need that independent person to come in, and we need that. But to make the long story short, I am Holy Spirit filled. I am a woman of God. I am. I don't know any other way to live. And my daughter and I, we attend this church, and she's on the steward board. I'm a stewardess. Maybe that has a little bit to do with it, but I just feel that is an honor from our Lord, called by God, appointed by God. But one day, there is, oh my goodness, there's just a lot. There's a lot to say. But I was standing up in front of the congregation, and this is how I was addressed, that I was the disobedient one. And my daughter was cringing. She said, let's get out of, she was so upset. She goes, that remark is humiliating. You are not disobedient, Mom. And our presiding elder was there, everybody. I just felt, why would this person, but it's,
So see me after, because you got a lot going on right there right now. And I don't want to be dismissive, but one thing that I do want to say is, because often we say God is calling us to a place when in actuality God might be saying, get out, and we're not getting out, So I just want you to just think about that,
Yes.
because God does not require us to be wounded. Yes. That's not of God.
I know, thank you.
All right.
Thank you for your words. And thank you, everybody, for listening. This was my little counseling session.
And we didn't even start yet. This is much deeper. Yes, sir.
All right. Thank you very much for your words and your emphasis. This is more of a comment, and maybe it fits in with what you're trying to say, or what you have said. I appreciate your emphasis on healing. Marcus Borg talks about the characteristics of the early church, and sin was a part of what the early church did, but healing, seeking or offering refuge, giving liberation were just as equal in importance as sin. And I don't know whether you've started a movement to have healing as something that's really important for us as a religious community to lift up. And then my own personal experience is that in a relationship with, out of my own tradition, the light, that I have asked for help to understand what the hurt is. And to my surprise, just naming it puts me on a quicker recovery.
Exactly.
As to once I get a name for it, and then I can pray for more healing.
Exactly. And yes, I have started a movement. It is my goal. I just want to share with you all, I did a community dialogue in Norwich back in January, and for some people, they were so offended that I was having this conversation. Deeply offended. I mean, I won't even bother to tell you some of the comments, but I realized after hearing some of the comments, this is much bigger than I. So when I responded yes to my calling, I had no idea what I was getting into, but I'm here to serve. So.
Have you developed any, like, healing rituals? So in my tradition, we've had a lot of church closings, and instead of being like a funeral where you acknowledge the person dying, whatever, it's more like a divorce. Did people want it? Did they not want it? What do we do about it? There's no funeral, there's no wake, there's no nothing. So do you have any rituals? Have you written any rituals to try and, it's like the stepchildren have to go wherever mom or dad goes right now, and nobody asked them if they wanted their parents to get remarried.
Yeah. So what I actually do, which I was going to talk about a little later, I do have very specific programs. I have programs for people individually who want to do work on their wounds of religion. I can go into churches and talk specifically with that church about what's going on with them and develop rituals for them. So oftentimes when I'm doing work around pastoring, I take a look at the hurts, and I do workshops within that church to say, what do we need to do to heal? I try to target it towards their needs. And of course, some things are going to be common across all churches because, again, church folks are crazy, and it's the same, right? So I do develop programs to work with them, but I like to, as much as possible, to see what the church's needs are, or if it's a clergy that I'm working with, to see what the clergy needs are or the individual needs are. Okay.
Do you ever get pushback from leaders from your denomination? And how do you handle
From
it
my
if you
denomination, I actually haven't gotten too much pushback from my denomination. I'm grateful that the people in I'm Presbyterian, and the people in my presbytery are kind of open to this conversation. I've done talks at our presbytery meetings. I have gotten pushback from some other churches because it threatens power sources. And when I did the community dialogue, I actually had a pastor who was upset that his wife was attending. I had a pastor to ask someone, how could you be a part of that? It's demonic. You didn't even come, so you don't even know what it's about, but it was the title that threw them off. And so I know that it's a lot of pushback because it's threatening power structures. If I'm talking about the wounds of religion, and I'm saying we have to begin with the top down, it's threatening a lot of folks. But we got to deal with it, right? If you see the hurt that I see when I work with people, you know that it's time to deal with it. If you even uncover your own hurts, because sometimes we don't even realize how we've been hurt. And, we got to deal with it. So I need all of y'all's prayers. Right.
Is there a blueprint for either a leader of a religious community or a member of that community to initiate some kind of program to address a healing process?
So, as I said before, for me, I go in and I deal with issues that are based on what that church is going through. But first and foremost, the first thing to do is to be willing to listen and admit that there is a problem. And what I find most often is that churches want to cover up that part of it. But then once you begin a process of listening and you say, you know, I'm open to dealing with this issue, then it's time to do the reflective work, to dig deep. When I work with folks, you dig deep. We don't do surface. We go deep. And if that means going deeper and deeper and deeper, we have to do that as well. And so I engage with people around exercises to help uncover it, and then exercises to say, what can we change in order for us to heal? I also go through, who do we need to remove from our lives? What policies and programs do we need to change if it's within an institution? Okay, what do we need to let go of in order to grow? And then, who are we serving? Right.
Hi, I really appreciate what you've said. I am now attending a historically black church, my mom, and I've been there for 3 years, and I was born on Saturday and in church on Sunday, literally. And so I've always grown up in a church institution. When I was 35, I came out as a lesbian, and the current church that I was in at that time with my husband, which was kind of weird, but I was dismissed pretty much. So I'm going to a traditional black church where all of my children at some point have attended. My oldest, I have 4, is 22, and she's like, I will never step foot in that church again. My second daughter is 18. She was a soloist in the choir and was amazing, but she too has also been like, no, Mom, I will never go back. And now my 16-year-old son has been out of the church for about a year. And you know what, while I don't necessarily agree with their choices, I think that what they're saying is right. And in our church, I was reading through the doctrine, and it was so archaic that it didn't even make any sense to me at all. And so when I look at that, and I don't know how, because we have a very patriarchal church, and when things happen in our church, gay people want to come or whatever, it is not something that we can do. I don't feel safe there. I go there because during my work week, I don't see any people that look like me. And that is the one reason why I attend that church, because of the people that I see there. And I don't necessarily feel that that's right, but I've threatened to leave, but have not gotten my bag out to go. And I wonder, I prayed, Lord, release me from going to church, because I don't feel like it. But I haven't felt like God is saying, you can go, I feel okay with you leaving. And so I am there. I have a wonderful relationship with my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, who has carried me through so much. But at the same time, how do you grow in a stagnant church when you don't feel like it's okay for you to leave? Perhaps your work is not done.
So I think the first thing that I would ask you, is it really God telling you not to leave? Because you just said that you're going for other reasons. So I think we need to take a step back and not blame God for stuff that we do. I'm not saying, I'm not in your mind and your body, so I don't know. I'm just asking you to think about it. Right? Because again, God does not want us to be abused. I heard you say, I don't feel safe in this church. I don't feel safe. How are you going to a church where you don't feel safe? Now, unless God has you going in there to do some work because you're going to change people's minds about LGBTQI issues, you know.
I am safe. I don't think that any bodily harm would ever come to me. I don't think that way, but it is a stagnant church. We are not growing in size or being out in the community or anything. We are stagnant, and it is actually because the leadership of our church comes down from every elder and does all this stuff, that the church at large, I feel comfortable in my body of believers in that particular church. But I don't feel comfortable in the church itself at large. Would I go to another church that had these letters and was the same? No, because I wouldn't be able to trust that. I trust the people in my
So I just want to say this particularly for everybody here. Remember I said that, my polity professor said, you can't change a system unless you're in the system. So if you're in a system and you don't like what's going on, do something about it. You can't go to church every Sunday and not like being at the church and not do something about it.
Oh, I'm doing something about it, like from standing up and turning around while the pastor was preaching. And standing there like that.
But how is that helping the larger denomination?
A larger church, but it helped us as a church come around what was happening in the church to say, no, this is not happening.
Okay.
Anymore. So that was what happened.
Mm-hmm.
It got the predator out. But there has been no healing from the upper church, even though they promised.
And so that's the sort of thing that I'm talking about. You have really a charge and a responsibility, if you're still going to be there, is to make enough noise so that the people higher up can do something about it.
Hello. Oh, sorry. Like you, I definitely identify with my profession being a ministry, and right now I'm on track for ordination in my denomination. And I have found that abuse can be subtle or not so subtle. And I heard what you said, your polity professor said, in terms of being within the system to change it. Question one would be, what are some steps for self-care if you decide to go that route? And then what about those of us who are considering maybe leaving the system, but still following our call?
So I will address the second one first, which was leaving the system and still following your call. When I was a student at Harvard Seminary and was now going to go to Yale, it was going to require some significant changes in my family household, namely finances, because I couldn't go to school in the evening at Yale. And so I remember when I was talking with my husband about this decision, he said, "Did God call you to be a minister or a Presbyterian minister?" I was like, oh. So I leave that with you, because God calls you to do the work. And sometimes we want to define how that work is going to be done. But when we avail ourselves, the doors open in a much bigger way for us. That's hopefully answers the first question. The second question. What was the first question again? About being self-care. Oh, that is so important. So there are a couple of things that I would say for self-care. One, of course, is finding a daily time to center yourself with the sacred. And so obviously most of us here probably engage in prayer, and we engage in meditation, devotions, and all of that. But a part of self-care is also going away for a while and resting. So needing to take maybe once a month some time away where you're going just to be with yourself. You're turning the phone off, you're going to spend some quiet time. You don't want to hear what anybody else has to say in that moment. Another part of self-care, again, is getting that trusted individual that you can work with, that you can go to. One of the things that I value about being a psychologist is because I'm an objective person for people who come in. So they can tell me whatever they want, and there's no judgment there. When you talk to people who are in your family, your friends, your church folks, they always got something to say. And it may not always be the helpful thing right? So for me, self-care is finding that person that you can also talk to guide you. The other thing that I would say is find a collective body of people, a group that you can be involved with who share some similar thoughts and beliefs as you do, because it's a way of helping you to manage all of the different things that are going on with your emotions, that are going on with you behaviorally as a result of being with that church. And again, it's people who can support you because they are not tied to that particular congregation. Yeah, you're welcome. Did you have a question?
I give to him first. You want it first? All right.
I'm sorry, I keep talking up. I didn't know the microphone was going around. So I didn't hear the beginning. I came in late, but I just felt moved to address when you talked about, is it God really speaking to you in abuse? So another example, I think, of that from my life was being in an abusive marriage for over 27 years, which what kept me there for so long was believing that that's what God wanted from me. And I recognized I was a prisoner in my own mind, and I would quote scripture to myself all the time about love is patient and love is kind, and God it meant for us to meet, and that's how I met him. And I finally, through a lot of healing and a lot of own work, got set free, and I saw how abuse can hold us in many different places, whether it's within our churches, within our marriages, because we convince ourselves somehow that that's what God wants for us, and it's so it's something to, like you were saying, think about it. It's really quite a process to think about that. So
I want to thank you for sharing that, because that was an example that I didn't give, but I've had people to come to me and tell me that their pastors have told them to stay in abusive relationships, that, children who are being abused to go home and to obey your parents, wives to obey your husband, and God does not want that for us. I have a gentleman that I'm connected with who used to be a pastor of a fairly big church. And he said that he left the church as a pastor because he was sitting one day talking with his minister of music's wife in his office. And she suddenly pulled up her sleeves and she pulled up her skirt to show him her legs that were so badly beaten. And he thought, how could the minister of music, someone he valued and trusted and loved and who seemed like he was holier than thou, be doing this to his wife? And she's hiding behind that. And it just tore him apart. And so God does not want us to be abused. And we do use scripture to hold people down. And that's the beauty of going to divinity school, is being able to read the Bible and understand the context and understand the Hebrew, understand the Greek, and understand that there was a whole lot going on that we don't understand. So we need to learn and read and show ourselves approved, right?
Thank you. I just have a quick question, I think, but before I ask, I just wanted to give a shout out to Candace Lowe here, who we're great Facebook friends. I don't know if she knows that, but say hello. Hi, Rich Cooper. Hi, Candace. But we, the three of us here, belong to a church just down the street here on Farmington Avenue, and it's a church that has attracted many people who have been hurt by their church, and they've sought different churches and come there. And it's also a church that has many different, probably the majority of the members come from a different, they grew up in a different church, come from a different faith tradition, or no faith tradition, or a very evangelical faith tradition. And I'm just wondering, in that context, would you have some thoughts about what kind of things we can do to make sure we keep that, the church to be a healing place for this great difference of people who have been attracted because they have been hurt?
So a couple of things kind of come to mind. Obviously, the people are coming because there's something they're getting from the church. And so I would first explore with them, what brought you to this church? What are the things that attracted you to be here and come to us, right? That's the first thing. But secondly, be open to what are some things that need to improve within the church to draw other people in. And thirdly, I would say let go of ego for whatever it is that you hear, because that's a hard thing when people kind of offer us feedback on ways that we can improve. And so when we let go of ego, that means that we're open to doing things that will draw other people in. I do want to just address, though, because I'm sure some people here are kind of saying, but what if this is my belief? What if I hold on to a certain belief? You know, I have this conversation with people all the time, particularly around LGBT issues, and folks are saying, but what if it's my belief? Am I supposed to just accept any and everything that people tell me? I'm not saying that at all. Whatever your belief is, what I'm asking you to do is to be open to a different point of view and to ask God to help you to discern where you should go, what you should do, how you should interact with folks. But I'm also saying we don't hurt folks in the process of trying to understand their perspective. And all too often in other churches, that's what we do. We hold on to our beliefs while not listening to the other person. Because how many times have you changed your mind about something based on interacting with someone and hearing their story? And so we have to find ways in which we're open to listening. But I hope that answered your question.
This is the last one for this session.
Okay.
Before we go back to
Okay, I just want to contribute a little. Personally, I was abused in my church, and whilst I was in the church, I didn't see anything wrong with it, because I felt like I'm doing the work of God, and it's normal. Mm-hmm. And God will fight for me, because there were prophecies here and there that stopped abusing her, indirectly. So just one day I heard a voice to go to the mountain, just to answer our sister's question. So I left and I went to Ghana. That's where I come from. And I went at a time, I wasn't going to do anything. It was during the Ebola season. Mm-hmm. I'm a nurse. Mm. When you come back, you end up losing your job. So why would you make such a trip? Mm. Against all odds, I felt the strong feeling that the desire go. So I left. I said, I don't care if I lose my job. So it was after I left, that was I realized that something was going on. If I had not made that trip, I would have died because of the abuse that I was going through in the church. Mm-hmm. So when I came back, for some reason, God has a way of taking us out of things. So I never missed church. But when I came back, I worked with State of Connecticut. I worked for Hartford Hospital. So I have to make up with all the days that I have missed work. Yeah. So I couldn't go to church for 2 days. Then all these gossips came out of the things that they had planned to do when I come back to the church. I said, wow. So that was when I heard a voice, you are not going there anymore. Mm. Then from then, that was when I began to see the abuse I went through. Up to today, whether there's a wedding, anything there, I can't go back there because of flashback. Mm. I haven't stepped my foot there again. And everybody, why don't you come when we invite you for? They don't know how I feel. Yeah. I don't even want to see the building again. Mm. Horrible abuse. But I didn't see it until I came out of it.
So I thank you for sharing that, because one of the things I want you to think about, sometimes we need to remove ourselves in order to see what's going on. If you think about it, if you were just enclosed in this circular, like had a circle around you and you're enclosed in it, if you're too close, you cannot see what's going on, right? But once you step out and you look into that circle, you go, oh, wow, I didn't even notice that. The other thing that stepping outside does is it exposes you to different things and new ways of seeing things. You cannot grow unless you let go of what you're already in. And sometimes we have a difficult time hearing God when we're in the midst of the chaos. Because for one thing, our emotions are involved, and we don't make good decisions when our emotions are involved.